The garage door's mechanical hum at 9:50 p.m. was the final curtain. It remains the last confirmed moment Nancy Guthrie existed in the living world. 84 years of life, a woman who nurtured 3 exceptional children and endured the profound grief of laying her husband to rest. Widowed far too soon, she had painstakingly reconstructed her entire world from the ashes of her loss. For decades, she served as the silent anchor for a prominent media dynasty. Then, in 41 minutes of midnight silence, she vanished while her neighborhood slept. Here is what they never told you. The sheriff stood behind that podium and publicly exonerated the family. His voice carried an air of absolute, unwavering certainty. He spoke as if the matter were settled, prompting the public to look away. Yet, something chilling remains, submerged within the official case files, a discrepancy the exoneration ignored. It was a void left completely unfilled by the scripted media briefings and the carefully curated public updates. One high-ranking official with total access to this investigation has been guarding a secret since the 3rd day, and it is finally surfacing. The sheriff's latest remarks do not suggest a conclusion. They do not sound like the words of a man sealing a folder for the final time. Instead, he has left the door slightly ajar. When his verbatim quotes are measured against 7 specific forensic inconsistencies tracked since February, the true-eye picture emerges. You are about to realize with chilling clarity why this investigation is far from its twilight. Stay with this narrative until the end. The evidence we are dissecting is a slow burn that demands your full attention. We begin with a startling admission buried deep within the sterile, official phrasing of the department's latest report. We will analyze forensic anomalies never fully disclosed and arrive at a psychological truth that no press conference has been willing to acknowledge. For those analyzing this case with us for the first time, our methodology remains singular and uncompromising. We reject speculation masquerading as news. Every revelation is anchored in sworn statements, forensic reporting, and verified accounts. No drama substituted for the cold, hard facts. This is the only acceptable protocol when a human life has vanished and the truth remains an unpaid debt. Ensure you are following this progression. As the genetic sequencing concludes and the technical data arrives, the shift in this case will be inevitable. When the cellular triangulation is finalized and the next fracture in the silence occurs, and it is coming, you will find the analysis here. You will receive the same clinical precision in those future updates that we are about to apply to the evidence right now. Let us begin. Most observers heard the word cleared and simply stopped paying attention to the details. That was a critical oversight. Sheriff Nanos never claimed a resolution. He never stated the evidence had yielded its final secrets. At no point did he declare that every lead had been exhausted or that every loose thread was officially tied. If you dissect his actual phrasing rather than the sanitized headlines, you find a man being hauntingly precise and deeply measured. Within that calculated rhetoric lies a confession. He stated that investigators were definitely closer, a very specific choice of words. Not perhaps, not hopeful, but definitely. Consider the psychological weight of that distinction for a moment. If the inner circle is truly exonerated and a new suspect is in the crosshairs, a seasoned lawman doesn't use the word closer. He would speak of a definitive trajectory or point toward progress on a specific forensic milestone. Closer is the vocabulary of a man still staring across a chasm where what is known has yet to meet what can be proven. It signifies that while the distance to the truth has narrowed, the definitive evidence remains just out of reach. It suggests the laboratory work is humming in the background, yet results remain pending. Curiously, Nanos also voiced a belief that Nancy survives. He maintained a steadfast conviction that a resolution is forthcoming, despite the mounting shadows surrounding the Guthrie home. This isn't the hollow dialogue of a department that has the situation under control or a case solved. This is the posture of a hunter still waiting, still observing, and following dark threads invisible to the naked eye. One of those strands winds back to a figure who emerged on day 3 and has haunted the periphery ever since, Tommaso Cioni. To understand the present, we must return to the night of January 31st, where the first fracture in the official story formed. Nancy Guthrie shared her final meal with her kin, a typical Saturday evening in the Catalina foothills that would soon turn cold. Nestled in the desert north of Tucson, her residence stood in solitary silence, far removed from the watchful eyes of any neighbors. It is a landscape defined by towering saguaros and that heavy, oppressive stillness unique to the high desert after the sun vanishes. She spent those final hours with her daughter Annie, her grandchildren, and Annie's partner, Tommaso Cioni. Cioni, a 50-year-old biology instructor born in Italy, had been a fixture in the Tucson community for over 15 years. At roughly 9:48 p.m., Cioni drove Nancy back. Whether he escorted her inside or watched from the curb remains a point of contention. At 9:50 p.m., the garage door hummed shut, sealing the residence from the outside world. That mechanical click represents the final, verified moment that Nancy Guthrie was confirmed to be alive within the safety of her home. Cioni departed. Exactly 4 hours and 13 minutes later, at 1:47 a.m., the security camera at the entrance was abruptly severed from its power. No mechanical failure, no atmospheric anomaly. A hand reached out to disconnect it with intent. 41 minutes later, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker, a device in constant sync with her phone, fell into absolute silence, ceased transmission, and died. Detectives flagged that specific heartbeat as the precise moment of disconnection. Yet, the formal exoneration left one chilling question unanswered, one that every public briefing has pointedly ignored, a mystery that a high-ranking official with deep access has been guarding since February 3rd. Where was Tommaso Cioni between 1:47 and 2:28 a.m.? The sheriff cleared the family on February 16th. That vindication is part of the record. However, the official statement omitted several critical details. It offered no phone logs, proving he was at a different location during those 41 minutes. It cited no security footage from elsewhere to confirm his whereabouts, nor any named witness. It delivered a verdict without the math. Scientifically, a result stripped of its methodology isn't proof. It's just an assertion, and assertions aren't answers. This is where the paper trail begins to pull away from the official narrative. On the same day, the Pima County Sheriff's Department publicly cleared the Guthrie family. February 16th, the car Tommaso Cioni used to drive Nancy home on the night of January 31st remained impounded. It wasn't released or returned. It sat in a forensic garage, still being picked apart. 10 full days after that clearance, on February 26th, investigative reporter Brianna Whitney verified the vehicle hadn't budged. It was still being scrutinized by the state. When reporters demanded answers, the department's reply was surgically cold. They only confirmed the vehicle remained central to the active probe. They didn't call the hold routine, nor did they claim the search was empty or nearly finished. They simply tied it to the ongoing investigation. Consider the standard mechanics of police work when a vehicle is merely a peripheral detail. If you clear a family and their car was just a routine seizure, you return the keys. You tie off that thread and move your resources to the next lead. There is zero tactical logic in holding property belonging to people you have already deemed innocent. Keeping a car in a forensic bay for weeks after a clearance while citing an active probe is a massive anomaly. Those two official stances are fundamentally incompatible without a hidden reason. Sheriff Nanos, when cornered on the issue, characterized the seizure as standard procedure mandated by the court. Notably, he never claimed the car had been returned because it was still in their possession. He measured his words with the chilling precision of an executive who knows more than he is willing to share. Eventually, the car was handed back to Annie Guthrie, and the forensic hold ended. But that return came with a deafening silence. There was no explanation. The secrets pulled from that car during those weeks of analysis have never been disclosed. The car is home, but what was found inside it, or what was transferred between it and the estate that night, remains a void. This isn't shadow chasing. It is a documented, verifiable hole in the story. And in criminal justice, such gaps don't just vanish simply because a press release says so. February 7th, 2026, the 7th day of the search for the truth. At least 3 Pima County deputies pulled up to the Guthrie Cioni residence in unmarked vehicles. Inside, the house was a tomb, lights off, curtains drawn. Yet, observers saw rhythmic flashes through the windows, the signature forensic photography. A deputy was photographed exiting the home with a white, hard-shell Pelican case standard armor for high-tech evidence tools. He had entered the residence carrying those tools. When he emerged, he was also clutching a simple brown paper bag. Former intelligence agent Tracy Walder recognizes that visual shorthand instantly. The white case is the kit. The brown bag is the harvest evidence collection. That is the universal language of forensics. It is the unmistakable sight of investigators securing fragments they intend to analyze in a lab. The deputies stayed within those walls for nearly 3 hours, according to journalists watching from the street. The investigation narrowed its gaze specifically toward the garage scene. Annie and Keon gave their full consent, bypassing a warrant, a level of cooperation that deserves to be acknowledged very plainly. Defense attorneys in high-stakes criminal cases usually warn clients never to permit such a warrantless, deep-diving forensic intrusion. The trio chose to waive that protection voluntarily. Those with secrets rarely grant investigators total access to their garage while sitting quietly for 3 hours of forensic work. Yet, 6 days after that sweep, the family was officially exonerated in the eyes of the public. What remains missing is any explanation of what those brown evidence bags held or what the processing actually revealed. Whatever was found, whether items from that garage were deemed irrelevant, remains a mystery, as does the outcome of those 3 hours inside Kone's residence. Exoneration arrived, context didn't. During the 6-day gap before the February 10th clearance, the Sheriff's Department issued an official public statement. They confirmed that the forensic sweep of the Guthrie property would persist through the night and into the following morning. They weren't concluding, but continuing. Their own words painted a picture of an active, forward-looking probe. 6 days before the family was exonerated, any journalist, investigator, or potential juror would have noticed the pattern. Anyone watching this sequence from the outside is left with a nagging question. What changed in those 6 days? What did the lab results uncover that shifted the investigation's direction so sharply? The total absence of an explanation regarding those results is perhaps the loudest silence in this entire case. The individual who stepped onto Nancy Guthrie's land in the dead of night did not arrive there by chance. They arrived with a plan, wearing a mask and gloves, carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack with reflective straps. A handgun was secured in a holster centered at the waist, a highly specific carry style that forensic analysts noted. They arrived knowing precisely where the doorbell camera was installed. They knew how to reach the lens, and they understood that one camera was not their only obstacle. Law enforcement insiders hinted that this wasn't just one camera. Multiple devices across the property were methodically neutralized in the darkness. This was the work of someone who had already mapped the terrain during the middle of the night. This isn't improvisation. It is cold reconnaissance, chillingly translated into execution. A floor plan committed to memory and then navigated under pressure. Only 3 categories of people possess such specific knowledge. A frequent visitor who had spent enough time inside to observe camera placements during regular stays, a person orchestrating deliberate surveillance conducted over multiple nights, or perhaps an individual who received layout information from someone who knew the house intimately. Now, consider the details that Fox News and CNN independently verified in late February. One FBI doorbell image was captured on a completely different day than the others, not the morning of February 1st. Furthermore, a source close to the probe confirmed to investigative reporters that the masked figure had scouted Nancy's entrance before the abduction. A distinct encounter, a preliminary approach, a dry run. The sheriff dismissed this, stating no timestamps existed, and the idea of a prior visit was purely speculative. The conflict in these records is documented, and the forensic meaning of a prior visit is staggering. It suggests the figure on that porch was no stranger to the house, not to take Nancy yet, but to verify camera angles and secure the path of approach. A seasoned FBI profiler scrutinized the doorbell footage, noting a chilling detail at the moment the suspect first attempted to block the lens. Hesitating, then retreating, they gathered garden foliage to use as secondary concealment. This tactical sequence was not an act of panic. It was someone meeting a minor obstacle and adjusting without ever breaking their operational rhythm. Maintaining that level of composure at 2 a.m. comes from meticulous preparation, not impulse. Behind that preparation lies a source of knowledge about that property that has never been traced in any statement. Most believe DNA evidence exonerated the family, closing the case. But the forensic record tells a different story. The family was exonerated, but according to the forensic record, the mystery remains far from solved. Upon entering the residence of NY on February 1st, forensic teams failed to isolate a solitary, untainted biological signature from any single source. The evidence pulled from those walls revealed a complex genetic tapestry, a mixed profile, where the DNA of multiple individuals sat entwined at the point of recovery. This development was formally acknowledged by the sheriff on February 19th during a statement confirming that the unidentified biological material found within the home was, in fact, a composite of multiple sources. C. Moore, a preeminent authority in genetic genealogy at Parabon Nanolabs, weighed in on the implications of that specific forensic detail. She noted that such overlapping genetic markers typically suggest violent, forced interaction rather than accidental transfer or environmental contamination. In this dark context, that single-word mixture carries immense weight, highlighting a nuance in the data that went largely ignored by the public. When the sheriff publicly discussed the results that supposedly exonerated the family, he pointed to CODIS, the national index housing genetic records of convicted felons and known arrestees. Meanwhile, a glove discarded roughly 2.5 miles from the primary scene yielded a unique male profile that triggered no alerts in the national database. Authorities later verified this DNA was entirely distinct from the samples found inside the house. 2 separate locations, 2 different biological enigmas, both yielding dead ends. Yet, a fundamental question remains buried beneath the official narrative, one that no press briefing has dared to resolve. There is a vast, clinical chasm between scanning a profile against a database of known criminals and performing a head-to-head comparison with a biological sample taken directly from a person of interest. Tommaso Cioni's name is absent from criminal registries. Consequently, his genetic code would never appear in a CODIS search. A lack of a database hit proves nothing regarding his presence at the scene. It is a silence that offers no true answers. It is a void merely confirming he has never been processed through the federal justice system before this moment. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has maintained a calculated silence on which methodology they actually employed. While they declared the family cleared, they relied solely on the absence of a database match to support that claim. At no point has any official confirmed that Cioni's DNA was physically cross-referenced against the complex mixture found within the residence. This specific forensic discrepancy, arguably the most vital piece of the puzzle, remains shrouded and unaddressed by the state. Even Sheriff Nanos appeared to tread carefully when choosing his words. He admitted that investigators may possess the killer's DNA from the home, that single word may, underscoring the lingering uncertainty. He conceded the forensic work was unfinished, noting that the biological evidence from the house held far more weight than a stray glove found miles away. Those complex strands are currently being dissected in a private Florida lab and at the FBI specialized facility in Quantico, Virginia. Experts at Parabon Nanolabs are now applying advanced genetic genealogy to the material extracted from the primary scene. Moore has voiced absolute certainty that this scientific deep dive will eventually unmask the owner of that DNA. For her, the identification isn't a question of if, but when. It is simply a matter of time. Once that answer is unearthed, it will outweigh every official statement made since February 1st combined. On February 3rd, 2026, 3 days into the hunt, a veteran journalist broadcast a revelation that shattered the established narrative of the investigation. With 36 years embedded in the world of high-stakes reporting, she is a fixture of the American news landscape. Having chronicled the nation's most notorious crimes, her reputation is built on the weight of her words and the depth of her sources. On that particular day, she leaned on a contact within the law enforcement community, one she described as exceptionally well-placed. This insider allegedly possessed flawless credentials and intimate, real-time access to the heart of the active case. This source provided 2 chillingly specific pieces of intelligence. First, that Annie Guthrie's car had been seized and tied directly to Cioni. Second, that Cioni had emerged as the primary target of the investigation. The reporter was meticulous, framing these claims as the source's internal assessment, rather than verified legal facts. She admitted that family members are often the first to face the microscope, but maintained the credibility of her informant was beyond reproach. Despite the specificity of the report, which reached millions, the Sheriff's Department issued a blanket denial of every detail. By February 5th, Sheriff Nanos stood before the cameras, branding the leaked information as dangerous and irresponsible. A stark divide formed in the public eye. Then, on February 12th, the journalist faced a direct inquiry regarding her stance. She was asked pointedly if any new information had surfaced to contradict her previous report. Her answer was unwavering. Her source had stood firm on every claim, every single day since the story first broke. They remained resolute through the official rebuttals, the public exonerations, and every carefully curated statement from the authorities. She also disclosed a detail that barely registered in the public eye. Her contacts suggested that, once the initial story broke and the name Cioni took hold of the national psyche, the internal pressure of the case didn't slacken. It constricted. The exposure of the informant's perspective didn't push the detectives back. It drove them deeper. Per that insider, a high-level figure with a direct line to the forensic lab, the electronic tracking data, the witness statements, and the physical evidence logs the clearance came through. And yet, they stood their ground. If that source had been mistaken, or if the early theories were based on a distortion of facts later fixed by new data, the path forward would be routine. You dial the reporter, you explain how the narrative evolved, you revise the timeline. That is the hallmark of a credible source when the facts change. That phone call was never made. Banfield verified this on the record. The informant stood by every detail of the original report, refusing to blink even after the clearance. To this hour, a clearance is nothing more than a temporary status check in a fluid investigation based solely on what is known in the moment. It is not an exoneration. It is not a promise that future evidence won't completely rewrite the ending. Evidence is an evolving creature. Investigations never stand still. The forensic genealogy being mapped at Parabon is unfinished. The trace on the holster is still an open wound. The cellular tower logs, which Sheriff Nanos admitted have already narrowed the list of suspects, are still being meticulously sifted. The mixed biological samples from the residence are still under the microscope. And buried within that mountain of open files is the answer that an elite law enforcement source, an individual who sits in the briefing rooms and parses the raw files before they are sanitized for public consumption, has been signaling towards since February 3rd. 33 days. That is the length of this shadow. No suspects in custody, no verification of life, and no bridge between what the public was told and what the records actually prove. The Bureau has vacuumed up roughly 10,000 hours of video from the surrounding area. Doorbell cams, storefront systems, and dash recorders, 10,000 hours being scrutinized frame by frame, using enhancement tech to pull secrets from the shadows. A neighbor's lens caught a vehicle moving with urgency through the zone at approximately 2:30 in the morning, on February 1st, 6 minutes after the victim's pacemaker went silent. That specific clip is currently being dissected. The tower data is being crunched, and the sheriff indicates that the results are already surfacing. Triangulating cell signals with carrier logs can place a handset within a few meters of its actual position. If that digital trail exists for the critical window between 1:47 and 2:28 a.m., it is a piece of evidence that cannot be spun or neutralized by any podium statement. Then there is the backpack, the Ozark Trail 25-liter hiker pack, an item sold exclusively by Walmart. Detectives hold the purchase history for every single unit sold in the Tucson region. Every transaction, every card swipe, every storefront. That thread is still being pulled tight. The holster, which the sheriff himself called unique, is being traced through every gun shop in the county. A distinctive holster leaves a much more traceable footprint than a generic bag. If investigators can tie it to a specific model and that product to a buyer, the path to a suspect narrows to a point, and the DNA found inside that house is the one reality that no lawyer can argue away. It is a cold, binary truth. It matches, or it doesn't. When the lab returns those results, they will arrive with a finality that no press release can ever touch. Sheriff Nanos insists the investigation is closing in. He claims to believe Nancy is alive. He speaks with a total conviction that this will end in a resolution. Those are not the words of a man reading from a teleprompter. Those are the words of someone watching the strands of a web tighten in a room away from the cameras. On day 24, Savannah Guthrie shared a video that froze the country. She spoke of every hour and every second being a cycle of pure agony. She admitted her mother might already be gone. Then she said something that carries a chilling weight when you look at the evidence. She said, "If you have been waiting for a sign, let this be the moment you choose. Come forward. Speak the truth." She wasn't making a general plea to the masses. Those words were a precision strike by a woman with 20 years of journalistic experience, designed to look like a public message but function as a private warning. She was speaking to someone specific, someone who knows exactly where the truth is hidden. Perhaps you are weighing the heavy burden of silence against the price of truth. If you hold a fragment of Nancy Guthrie's fate, The Pima County Sheriff's tip line is 520-351-4900. Reach the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. $1 million cash is offered anonymously. 0 questions asked. The Guthrie family remains resolute in their public promise to honor every cent of that reward. 7 documented facts. 5 questions left unanswered by the state. 1 woman who has never returned home. The hooded figure on that doorbell camera remains a ghost. The complex profile of mixed DNA is still undergoing analysis. The informant who implicated Tommaso Cioni on day 3 has never wavered. The sheriff claims the circle is closing. The truth is coming. Follow this case and enable alerts. When it breaks, you will hear it here first, with the same rigor seen for 40 minutes. No theories masquerading as certainty, no sensationalism replacing evidence, just an unflinching look at the record until this concludes. Nancy Guthrie deserves the truth.